Appreciate that. So you thought you were getting item. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. I don't know. Is it me? It's me. Let's get off the glasses, get off the mask. It's me. I am really happy to be here. And one of the things that I would like to start off with is I always like to know who I'm talking to. And so I asked for a list yesterday of who was participating. So I looked at it mainly to see the years in the business, which I kind of have a handle on, but I'm going to be asking your help for some more. But in this class, I have my gym partner of years. Hello, Ian Caird. I have a tennis playing friend from years ago, Leah Beth Ledoux. I have former clients before they got in the business and became top producers, the Venturis. I have some people out of my office, Morgan and Chris. Oh, and I know there, Bennett. Bennett and Ian are the other ones that came into the business in my year, which was 1976. So I've got quite a good crew, and I'm looking forward to working with you here. Now, because of who I know is in this class, one of the things that I hope you do is when we get into the questions and the answers, that those of you out there, not just the ones with tons of experience, and there's a lot of you, but everybody joins in, because it's that kind of an input that's going to make this class really valuable. So hopefully you'll all become part of it. One of the things that I wanted to start out with is just you've heard who I am, and I've kind of told you who you are, but one of the things I'd like you to do in the chat box right now, would each of you put the year you began selling real estate? Just type it into the chat box. This is going to help a lot, because as we start to look through things, when you figure out the decades that you were in the business, it's going to be really important then when you see some of the feedback and some of the talk, right? And so as you look at that, that's going to be helpful. Now, if you ask a question, maybe you just kind of reiterate in that question what year you started in the business. And again, that's going to be very helpful. What this class is and what this class is not. I remember a time that I got on a train in Italy. It was some of my first time taking public transportation in Italy. And I rushed through the train station, and there were all the trains, and I had my ticket in hand, and I got on board, and I found my seat and my seat number, and there was somebody in it. And I kind of was taken aback. Lovely Italian couple. And I said, I think this is my seat. I'm going to Genoa. And they looked at it and very nicely looked at me and said, no, this train's going to Genova. It's going to Geneva. I went, oh, okay, and out the door I went. So I think most of you know that you're here at this class, but in case you don't think this is the class, here's your chance to exit. Now, what this is not, I'm not trying to teach the purchase agreement, because there are great instructors out there. Beth Hilton has a class in it. They're great instructors who teach you the purchase agreement. So that's not what we're doing. We're going to try to get this historical perspective, and I think it's going to be like running a marathon in the time that it takes to run the 200-meter dash. But okay, we'll at least get the big frame. So let's start with another question. Why look back? Well, if we don't look back at where things came from, we're sometimes going to come on something in a contract and go, I can't explain this. I don't understand why it's the way it is. And if you look back and you start to see where we progressed from, you start to get a better understanding of why we're here and why we have these changes. And there are a lot of you on this screen right now, and I was in the midst of it. We started in a period, and I want to say it was maybe in the 90s and early 2000. The purchase agreement was changing so rapidly that you would get a purchase agreement and you would just get used to it, and what would happen? A new one came out. And heads were spinning, right? And what did a lot of that revolve around? A lot of those changes during that period of time were around broker duties, agency, non-agency, transaction, dual agency. When we were still trying to figure out who we were, a lot of us didn't know from any given purchase agreement to the next because it changed so much. So that's why it's important for us to get a handle on this and understand where we're at. All right. So let's go to the next slide and talk about, I'm not going back 100 years because I don't have a purchase agreement from 100 years ago, nor anyone to talk to. But what we do have is the contract from 1955, where the land that Coronado Center was built on was purchased. Now, Ian, is that a Caird signature I see on that? Can you look at that agreement? If you want to unmute and look at it.
Yeah, I'm unmuted now, but I don't think so.
It says
my dad worked for Bellema as a construction superintendent, but that looks like RV, either Kim or Kin, C-A-I or yeah, C-A-I-D. So
okay.
if it, my dad signed his name oftentimes RB Caird, but
okay.
So I don't think that's his.
Okay. But let's just look at this one for a minute, because we have to have some kind of a baseline to move forward from. So if you look at this, one page and really not a lot of detail, everything handwritten. And as we went through these, Channing and I went through these, one of the things on this one that's interesting, she pulled off a side section. By the way, this PowerPoint wouldn't have existed without Channing Kelly. So I would have been hoping that I could have held something up to the screen and had you be able to know what it was. If you pull it off to the side, can you see there what is under the signature side? Where it talks about, well, it's really hard to read. Anyway, at the very bottom second signature line, it says purchaser dash wife. So the default was there must have been a wife here that we're going to have a purchase agreement line for. I thought that was kind of interesting. All right. So this handwritten copy and single page infrequently updated. Now, the reason I can tell you infrequently updated is we use a one-page purchase agreement into the 70s, right? So we had one page into the 70s. Now, the carbon copy and all of that, you know, thank goodness we're way away from that. But this is your starting point. So let's move to the next one. Where we are today. We're now 20 pages. We've got multiple revisions every year. And I doubt if there's a year that passes that we don't revise it. We've got a myriad of forms for special situations, digital creation and signing, thank goodness, addresses partner needs, which you're going to see in another slide. We try to, the purchase agreement tries to anticipate problems more than we used to be able to do. And we have buyer protections that are built in, and they're easier to create these purchase agreements. But when you all agree they're more complex to close, we can write them up pretty easily, but more complex to close. So I want to jump back one slide real quick, Channing. So the one pager, handwritten in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Here's a true story. I had somebody who wanted to see a house. It was kind of a hot market. I was very new in the business. And I went to the file drawer at the office, opened it up, pulled out that purchase agreement, took it with me to the house, and we showed the house, came out, and they said, we want to buy it. I said, okay. On the hood of the car, we stood there and we filled out the purchase agreement, right? And they got the house. It was done. And the reason we could do it, we didn't have to have a lot of other data that had to come in to that. Now, you guys could say, well, today I could take my computer with me and I could put it on the hood of the car, I could put it on the trunk, and I could put everything in it. Yeah, you could, right? but not quite as easily as we used to be able to do. And we don't have to get as much data back then as we do now. So the ability to do things with the purchase agreement back then was easy or easier. However, what was the other thing about those early purchase agreements? Anybody have an idea? So much more room for problems because there just wasn't enough specificity. And we'll get into that. Okay, let's go back over to 2021. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the purchase agreement of 2021, but let's just talk about some of the things that it addresses. Then we'll go back and take a look at some of the individual items. So the myriads of forms for special situations. Any of you who were selling prior to probably 1990-ish or so, if you wanted to have a occupancy agreement, what did you have to do? You had to create your own, right? And I'm going to show you an example later. So you just take that addendum that you'll see later, and Bennett, you probably did this, didn't you? And you just write in, okay, they get possession on, and they get it for so many days, and here's how much money you'll pay, and boom, that was it. Yeah, all written by us. So now, thank goodness, we all have special forms for special situations. And the reason that is important is goes back to when we started with our first forms, they were crafted by attorneys. And the attorneys didn't really understand the total picture of our business. They understood some. And so they couldn't really give us everything we needed. So over the years, we started to get the forms we needed so that we weren't practicing law. That was our agreement with the lawyers, is we will not practice law by trying to create our own forms. And besides, if we did that, we ended up in trouble, right? If we're trying to do something pre-formed and it's not pre-done by and vetted by an attorney, we could get in trouble. So thank goodness. Oh, hold up.
Bennett, somehow, I don't know why we're
seeing
seeing your screen.
You want to unshare your screen, Bennett, or turn it off, or?
I'm gonna just stop that.
Okay. There we go.
Okay.
Okay. And addresses partner needs. We're going to go into that a little bit more in a minute. Anticipates problems. Most of the boilerplate language in purchase agreements is there for what? Anybody? Anybody want to tell me? Okay, the boilerplate, the stuff that is built in, that is up, yes, to protect us. Bev, you're right. And what else? There was another reason why they put in the boilerplate on a lot of this. So part of it was we didn't have to stop and resolve problems every single transaction. A lot of these early purchase agreements, yes, and not practicing law. A lot of the early purchase agreements didn't have specifics about how things were to be handled. Okay, it was fairly loose. Not fairly loose. It was really loose, as you'll see in some things. So we started adding specificity about how to handle things so that instead of us trying to negotiate with that other broker, okay, we could go to the purchase agreement and say, here's what it says. And by the way, guess who is so happy we have these things in our purchase agreement? Title companies. Because they, of course, are our partner in closing these things. And if they don't see specificity in those purchase agreements, everything's up in the air. I talked to Julie Buckaloo at Stewart, and I asked her, I said, you know, what is your opinion over the years of the purchase agreements and what was most helpful? And she said, well, you said so many things. For instance, she said, being able to look at that and know instantly, because of the latest purchase agreement, is there a sole and separate to be involved in this transaction? She's happy that that showed up. Being able to understand who's paying for what used to be in the purchase agreement, right? And what the costs were. It's not so much anymore. They're kind of missing that. It's a little bit difficult. But they're our partners, and so their feedback is very important. All right, let's move on to the next slide. All right, so pretend that house that you see there is 1955, and that's the purchase agreement from 1955 is backing up the sale of this house. So we've got savings and loan. That's a whole nother topic. That could be a full class on banks and savings and loans, but primarily we got our loans from savings and loans at that time. Albuquerque Federal Savings and Loans was one of the biggies here. And then you had the selling broker and buyer and the seller and the listing broker and a title company. That little house was kind of tiny. It's like the old, or not the old, it's like the new concept of the little house, right? So that kind of stayed that way for a couple of decades. And then what started happening as technology came in? Suddenly, we have insurance is actually written into the contract. Inspectors are coming into the contract. Oh, appraisers who may or may not have existed before. Oh, surveyors, photographers, measurement too, repair companies. Now here come all of the others. You've got the federal government, the state government, you've got the EPA, you've got CAR, you've got the New Mexico Real Estate Commission, you've got the Internal Revenue Service, you've got risk reduction, you've got E&O, Freddie Mac and Freddie Mae. I mean, all of a sudden, that little bitty house has expanded and is handling all of these, what I call the extras that have come in to our business. And I don't mean extras in a derogatory fashion at all, but there are things to be addressed that for the most part didn't exist when we started selling and using these first purchase agreements. They just didn't exist. So what had to happen? We had to come up with a way to address how they interfaced right into our business. And what was the most natural place to put them? In the purchase agreement, right? Because they started to create deadlines, they started to create contingencies, they started to create a situation where if we didn't address them and they lived outside the purchase agreement, what were we doing all the time? Calling that other broker and saying, you know, I know we said that we would close on, and I'm going to read you guys one of the best closing date things that I could find back here in a minute, but we can't make that. You know, we're not going to make it. Can we just agree that we're going to change it to, the 10th of October? Oh, sure, I'll talk to I'd be fine. These kinds of things went on all the time. Or even as late as sometime, probably in the early 2000s, you would get an inspection of some kind done. And what would one broker to the other broker, what would happen? Anybody? Verbal agreements. Exactly. Pick up the phone, say, you know what? They found termites. We'd like you to treat for termites. Okay, well, let me talk to my seller. Okay. Yeah, we'll do that. And that was it. That's as far as it went. So can you imagine? Agency. Oh yeah, agency. That's a whole different. You're right. That is a huge umbrella to talk about, because when I first started selling real estate, it was sub-agency. We worked for the seller. We were a sub-agent of the listing broker. You know, that's who we owed our fiduciary responsibility to, in a sense, is to the seller. So yeah, there's tons of that. So it's hard for me to talk and read your. So if I miss something, we're going to go back and pick some of these up and talk about them. All right. So what I did is I tried to, in the next slide, I tried to come in and say, can I break these changes into little sections about why the change happened? And I think this change might have, you know, it might apply to a lot of businesses. But first, necessity, right? We had to. There were just reasons we had to. Opportunity. And that opportunity is where we had all these allied industries that had never been necessarily involved in our transaction before want to join in. Suddenly there was, and a lot of it was consumer advocacy, right? Where we really needed their help for people buying a home. Technology, what a huge word that is, and the influence that it had on our business and our purchase agreements. But most importantly, from my perspective, maybe it doesn't trump necessity, but is experience. These purchase agreements would not have changed and would not be viable and would not address our needs if there wasn't the experience that we have using them, or that brokers all over use, and being able to take that feedback and come back and create a better form. So note, let's go to the first one on necessity. So how many, can you guys see this well enough to kind of talk about it a little bit? I'm going to point out a couple of things.
Yeah.
Good, Beth, okay. So clarity. This isn't even bad. I mean, there's writing in the margin and there's writing up above. And if you'll note at the very top, it says repair sink in middle bathroom and leaky faucet in something bathroom, home whatever, insurance to be. Now, if you want to read that closing date in the middle, do you think it could be up for discussion about what the real closing date might be? Crossed out 2 or 3 times, right? I mean, what is it? Anybody who was in the title business during these years, I don't know how they did it. I have no idea how they did it, but you saw this all the time. So the clarity side. Now I want to point out one other thing
Beth
because,
is asking here. It is
oh, okay, thanks.
yes, so 1978, Beth.
Right, I'm sorry, I thought, yeah, down at the bottom, 1978. It says right underneath, so that's the year of that, which is one of the earlier ones we found once we got out of 55. I want to point out something because I have a personal story about it, and I'm hoping that I get a lot of personal stories when we get to the story part of this. But if you can look on this one, and right below where all of the credit report, recording fees, survey, appraisal, where that is all noted, there's a little line and it says, sellers agree to pay all other costs to consummate this transaction. Now, I know she's moved me back, I know. So my personal story, when I started selling real estate, there was no such thing as points and origination on mortgages. Didn't exist. So I accepted, had a seller accept a purchase agreement. It had that little line in it. And by the way, when they did, there was not as many things up here where you have like the origination fee. It was much less available. And we went to closing and there was a 1-point discount on the seller side. We were all shocked, you know, where did this come from? They don't do that. Well, they had started doing it. Does anybody know why they started doing it? Okay, so, okay, Ian.
I think, Ida, if I'm remembering correctly, it had to do with being able to balance out the changes in interest rates. And interest rates can move on a daily basis, sometimes even during the course of the day. And I think that just helped them balance out as lenders to, you know, to get the fee they were looking for.
It's right in the boxes, right? Oh, from Ontario. Okay, right, Ian. Now, the other thing that kind of goes along with this, and let me just, a full disclosure, I was married to a mortgage banker during these years. And so I really lived the mortgage business on a firsthand basis. So you're exactly right. And you're also would like to know, or I would like to tell you, the savings and loans were undergoing some dramatic losses. And they were looking for ways to be able to make some additional money, right? They were losing on their deposits and they needed to make up money. So the origination and discount points helped. The other thing that Ian was talking about, this is around the time that a lot of these mortgage companies and banks started going to the stock market, to the bond market, not stock market, bond market, to sell their loans. And when they went there to do it, they had to pay a fee, right? I mean, you just had to. And it fluctuated on a daily basis. So that was the way that they were able, as Ian said, to balance out and make some money. But we didn't know about that. It was not common knowledge. So these little lines that started to be real catches here for people, we had to start dealing with them. And so when we would start to revise, we would start addressing. Government regulation. You know, this is when we started having lead-based paint, and we had to have that disclosure. We had to have about the appraisals on FHA and VA, which, by the way, I'll point out something on that in a minute. Risk reduction. If you have a purchase agreement that is this unspecified at certain points, you're going to have problems, right? There's going to be problems. So we needed to get more clarity in order to reduce the risk. Industry growth. I want to talk about this for a minute. So I want to give you an idea of the growth in realtor membership. Not even going to the state of New Mexico, which I can, but realtor membership over the years to give you an idea of when it went from being, I know you, I see you all the time, to not just because of technology you're distant, but just by virtue of numbers. So in 1949, and keep in mind at this point, this was not a realtor associate type situation. These were brokers, but probably a pretty accurate number across the state. And this is according to NAR. In 1949, 177. 1969, 479. 1974, it doubled, 826. Now those are a little misleading because they're just counting the brokers. 1975, 2,337, huge increase. 1979, 5,272. 2007, 8,000. 2019, 6,879. Now, when you talk that increase in numbers, you have to have a better driver in terms of how you interface with those brokers. What else? How many of you out there think that many people prior to 1985 did millions and millions of dollars worth of business? We couldn't, right? It was just impossible, but very few, just impossible. There weren't enough hands. We had no technology. We had to carry purchase agreements from house to house, signature to signature. We didn't even have fax. You know, we're hand carrying everything, right? We're in the old days. So you really had to have, as the numbers grew, we had to have a better way. And so thankfully along they came. Okay, here somebody asked about agency, New Mexico Real Estate Commission. Does anybody, well, and I don't want any of you instructors answering this at all. So let me say, just your average person out here, when was the New Mexico Real Estate Commission formed? Anybody know?
Put guesses in the checkbox.
Or any guesses if you want?
Tucker would be disappointed that I don't know this. You know, he did such a good job hammering that into us, and I don't remember.
1959.
Wow.
Yep. And so you think about 1959. Okay, so to me, it doesn't seem that long ago. I mean, I know to a lot of you, it seems a long time ago. To me, it doesn't seem that long ago. So I'm kind of amazed that that when they came in, that I looked at it and I went, well, therein lies a lot of the change that was driven for us, coupled with the government regulations, right? So you put those two things together and there comes a huge amount of change that we have to make to this purchase agreement. All right, let's go to the opportunity. Oh, we're still on necessity. I'm going to walk out of the frame for a second. So I want you to look at the handwritten addendum on the left and what they tried. I mean, they had no other source, right? They had no other way to do it. This is 1993, and what they needed to do to be able to cover their bases on possession and some repairs. Anybody who was back in this time, we did it because we didn't have an option, right? And so I'm looking at Pam Gentry, and Pam, I'm thinking that I bet you did this a lot, right? We just had to. Is this an amendment or an addendum?
That's forms humor.
And that's Linda. I like that. Okay. So we had to do it. And just think, 1993 really isn't that long ago. Does this make you appreciate your forms committee or what? Right? Okay.
Sorry.
Now, let's go back one to
Yeah, I'm
the,
trying to get there, sorry.
there we go. There we are. So there's your agency disclosure relationship. So that came, and you'd get it from different companies with different headings. You would get different things, and you were constantly in, okay, I have to sit down and read this, right? I can't just go forward with it. I've got to sit down and read it before we sign it. Let me put with that, how many here, and you can just, this is your broker practicing law. There, yeah, but we had no choice. We had no choice. All right, so let's ask this. How many of you remember the times when we had the Albuquerque Board of Realtors purchase agreement? And then there would be companies who would create their own purchase agreement and add and subtract whatever they needed to that they felt was right. Leah Beth's going on, and yep, Carol. So we had that. Okay, so when you get that purchase agreement during that time, you had to stop and you had to go through every single bit of it because it's new. You don't know what's been changed. So if I can just piggyback on that and say, what a wonderful thing when our state association took over and put together a purchase agreement with uniformity to be used by everyone, with all the extras that you needed. Now, the Albuquerque Board of Realtors, those of you again who were here a long time ago, we weren't real happy about that. We fought it for a while because we felt that we had the best purchase agreement. We were tuned in to Albuquerque, and we had the best purchase agreement, and we weren't so sure that the state would address everything. But that passed, and we got the purchase agreements. And I think today, most people would say that it was an absolutely wonderful thing for our business in order for all of us to be able to understand what we're filling out. So that was a really good thing. Sometimes we have to take back seat here in Albuquerque, but we don't always like it. All right, let's move on to the next one. Opportunity. So 1993, so look at this purchase agreement. One of the first ones where we started to point out all the different inspections that you could have, right? Tons and tons of them. By that standard of 1993, there were tons. And the reason, of course, is suddenly we have all these allied industries coming in. They saw an opportunity, and I don't mean that in a negative way at all. It was an opportunity to help the consumer make a better choice and make a better purchase by knowing what the house had and didn't have. Some of it was by law, right? The pest inspection. Could you get an FHA loan without a pest inspection? No, had to have a termite inspection. So you couldn't get it. Now, some of the well potability thing, maybe not so much back then because there wasn't as much law around it, right? But suddenly we had all these industries who came in and they wanted to add to the transaction. And we had to figure out, how do we put them in and add them to the transaction and do it in a way that is helpful to everybody? right? But particularly to the realtors involved and the buyers and sellers. You had to have that there. The increased parties involved, and that's the parties that we're now pulling together. A lot of these allied industries, that even to some degree, the savings and loans and banks, they were kind of in the background, right? They weren't quite as forefront as they are today. So once they started to move into the forefront, we had to start addressing how do we fold them into this purchase agreement and have them work with us and help us. Okay. Technology. I mean, what an absolutely huge factor this has been in our business. And for me to try to talk about it in depth is probably going to be like scratching the surface, you know, of something. But let's just talk about, okay, so we went from carbon paper and from carrying contracts to fax. And we were able to get that contract to the title company or to a buyer in Connecticut, whatever, we could get it to them quickly. We no longer had to have FedEx, we no longer had to mail. MLS, paper to electronic. When I started in real estate, they had just started, Bennett and Ian. Anybody else here in the 70s? Was anybody else? Pam, okay. Remember the old thermal paper, and you would go to look at the update that just came off of the thing, and they would run it, and you would have these long thermal runs. So MLS became electronic. And we thought it was great. Today it would be like watching paint dry. You know, you would sit back there going, is this the only thing I get? I mean, how long before I get new things? Email, critical. Form software, digital signatures, information access. We have such a responsibility today, whether we like it or not. We are the gatherers of the information for the buyers and sometimes for the sellers to make the decision and the closing and everything as correct as we can make it. So now we have so much more access. What do you think then they expect? Buyers and sellers expect more and more and more of us because of technology. They assume we can get that information, right? And in general, we can. So technology has helped us and it's made it better for us, but there's also probably a part of technology that has exposed us a little bit more. But the purchase agreement, when it sets out and they get their changes, it helps. You know, it helps address these. Okay. Experience. Now, on the left is out of the 2021 purchase agreement. It's now a list of where you can find every subject of importance, of big importance, in the purchase agreement. I would have loved to have had this back when I was trying to compare purchase agreements, right? Because this tells me where to go look and where to find it. And back then you didn't. You just had to start figuring it out by side. So that is wonderful. Statewide realtor forms, as I already talked about. I mean, that was so critical to helping us, and we learned that we needed it. We learned that we needed it in order to get everybody on the same page. Let's talk about the forms committee. The work that is done by your volunteers, both at the local and state level, is rarely as visible as it is with the forms committee. The forms committee, you see that result when those new purchase agreements come out, and you're able to sit there and look at it, although you probably don't know a lot of the background. So what you need to know, and what we'll actually talk about toward the end, is they don't function in a vacuum at all, and they don't just decide to make some of these changes because it seems like it's good or because they think it's good. If you look down to the next three things, user feedback, Oh, that's true. I wanted to call it, Bev, I wanted to call it it's experience or trial and error. Because oftentimes we try it, right? We think we've got it right. We think it's gonna work right. And you put it out there and you go, oh dear, well, no, we didn't think about that. That's not gonna work right. We need to change it, right? And you don't know often until you try it. So you have user feedback, and everybody here has an opportunity. If you see a problem in a purchase agreement that you think needs to be looked at, you can send it to the forms committee. We'll talk about that at the end and have them help you. Communication between boards and members. This is a technology thing. Before we had email and technology and the access to information, the way that people shared was at state and local meetings, state and national meetings. So you'd go to NAR and you would be in the professional standards, for instance, and something would come up and they would bring up a case. Well, then that person would take that back to the state and local level and say, this happened in California. It always happens in California. I think a lot of our stuff is California, right? So yeah, now can we look at it? You know, do we think we can use it? Do we think it will work for us? But today, we at a touch of a key, we can gather so much information to bring into this. And litigation. I mean, Ashley Strauss Martin and her legal update every year, that's critical. And anyone who is in an office, or if you're by yourself in an office, you owe it to yourself to go to one of her meetings, because the information that comes from it is so frequently about our purchase agreements, right? And what's going on, or the, as recently done, the seller disclosure. You know, there's a whole lot of things that you gain from that. And when they make the changes, you start to understand it. So the experience is huge. Let me say something about purchase agreements and experience. When we sit down, particularly with the buyer, but a seller as well, but particularly with the buyer, if we don't understand the purchase agreement and why something's in there and what happens if it isn't handled correctly, we can't explain it to that buyer. And a lot of buyers might raise their, roll their eyes or glaze over when you start talking to them, but we need to do that. And it used to be easy, and it's not easy anymore. It takes time. First time Channing sat down with my office, any of you who've been in there, it's small, and we have the low dividers so you can hear, what's going on, not by design. And she sat down with one of her first buyers with a purchase agreement. It was pretty lengthy back then. And an hour and 45 minutes later, she wrapped up, line by line, word by word, with an explanation for exactly what it meant and what they were doing and what their choices were. Most of us don't spend that kind of time, and you only have to do it once generally, to get them started, but we don't spend that kind of time. But having the knowledge to be able to spend that kind of time is huge. And there goes your idea of sitting with somebody in a class where you're actually learning the ins and outs and the fine points of a purchase agreement is so important. All right. Now, before we launch into real life experiences, I have one thing that I would like to bring up, and then we can get into some questions and answers. And like I said, I'm hoping all of you will join in answering this, because I think it's really important. So I have a couple of these. Well, I'm going to go back to one of the very first ones. This is in 1978. So let me just bring up a few things. The under the earnest money, where did the earnest money go back then? To the listing office, right? And it says right here in the contract, the earnest money will be delivered to the listing office. Well, that was seemed very normal at that time. But it didn't take long before that changed. And I think there was a little bit of nervousness when it did, but it's worked out well. Let's see. How about the return of earnest money? How easy did it used to be to get earnest money back without a lot of having to do anything? Do you guys know? Pretty easy, right? Did we have a termination agreement? Really? Not really. No. We just say contract's void and send me back the earnest money. And I think that, and maybe one of you who teach the class can tell me, but I have a feeling that back when they changed it, part of the reason was that it was probably better having a third party hold that earnest money than one of the brokers, right? So that was a very smart move to get it out of the broker's hands. And another one in the 1978 purchase agreement, they talk about needing to appraise for VA, needing to appraise for FHA, but there's no comment about a conventional one and having to appraise. Okay, so all of these things started to be problems, right? Because what did we learn? Those of you who sold back in these days, what did we learn about a conventional appraisal if somebody was putting 30% down? Anyone? If you were putting 30% down, it didn't have to appraise for the purchase price. If you were, most of you were getting an 80% loan to value loan. So you just needed it to appraise for enough to get that particular loan. And so the appraised value, it didn't have to be the purchase price. Well, you're right, Roberta, it can happen now, but in the purchase agreements, we do have at least the opportunity to say it has to appraise for such and such, right? And that didn't exist back then, so it didn't help. There is one here, and I'm not finding it, is that they had for the closing, they had upon completion of all title work and paperwork, and when the mortgage company is ready, that's when they were going to close. We saw it all the time. We saw it all the time. It would be so ridiculously vague. How did we do it? I mean, I really want to say, how did we do it? I'm not sure how we pulled it off with that kind of vague things that we have. And yet we did. We did. Okay, so I would like to go now to some real life experiences that you've had, either great with the purchase agreement, maybe bad with the purchase agreement, maybe red flags for your fellow realtor, anything that you'd like to talk about that helps us keep understanding why these revisions are so good for us and why we're going to move from 2021, right, Beth? We're going to move, there'll soon be a 2022. I mean, and something's going to be changed and something's going to be added. And at the very end, we'll have a slide up that will give you access to the forms committee if you'd like to volunteer, or a way to turn in a comment. But right now, let's have some real life experiences. Oh, love it, that forms committee. Absolutely. Okay, Pam.
This is not regarding purchase agreement, but my first experience back in 1977 in real estate was I had a person that had told me that I had talked to them, so I was going to their house to list it. I was getting tires put on at Firestone, and the guy who was helping me said, "We're looking for a house. Can you help us?" Because we used to have those signs on our car, so everybody knew we were in real estate. So I said, "Well, I've got one coming up. I'm going over to see them tonight. Do you want to come with me?" So he and his wife met me at the house. I told the sellers that I had a buyer coming too. So I told the buyer to go ahead and look around while the seller signed the one-page listing agreement in the kitchen. And when I went out to check on the buyers, they said, "We love it. We want to buy it." So I did have a one-page purchase agreement with me. So I filled it out, brought it to the sellers, they signed it, and I went the next day to my broker, who was Ken Grubb with Century 21, and said, "Guess what do I do now?" So he was a little appalled that I had brought all that, but sort of excited too. I was. My first sale listed and sold the same day, and that was in 1970.
That's a great story. You remember back in those days when you would go to use the lockbox because it was a lockbox that was just like the keys they used on used cars, and you'd open the lockbox and the key was gone? Because
Yeah.
people would just take the key so that you couldn't show it. So they take the key, you couldn't show it, they get their offer in. A lot of stuff happened back then. Would you put that, Roberta?
That guy, there was a guy that had a realtor services kind of office on Wyoming near Manala, I think. And we could bring him a key and you could go to him and pick up keys, all the ones that he had. It cost $10 or something to have him doing this with us. But that was very handy before the days. Otherwise, we had to drive to 5 different offices to pick up keys to show 5 houses.
His business, when the good lockbox came about, fell apart. And I want to say his last name, does anybody here remember his name? Ed Kastner? Anyway, I know exactly what you're saying. And it was so wonderful because those of you who started, say, 2000 and after, the time constraints that were put on us in trying to show a home and connect with paperwork pre that time was immense. So let me have one more story on my end, and I'm going to keep going. Anybody who wants a story. So I had a absolutely wonderful sales manager, Wayne Birch, at the Vaughn Company, and what a educator he was. Not in the traditional sense, but he was an educator. So in those days, we had offices that had about 18, 20, 22 people, and you had a full-time manager sitting there in the office Monday through Friday and usually half a day on Saturday. Can you guys believe that? I mean, you know, back then it made sense. It worked. And I was probably a year in the business and something happened. And I came flying into the office one Friday afternoon, absolutely beside myself because something had happened. Don't remember what. And I explained to him and I said, this just can't be. This just isn't possible. And he said, oh yeah, it is, you know, and that's right. And you can't do anything about it. And I said, well, if you knew this, why did you tell me? I said, well, why isn't there a book, you know, that we can go to find out about this? He said, the book would be this big. He said, you would never, it'd be bigger than the biggest dictionary you've ever seen. He said, so as I put in the end of my note thing, it's experience. You know, that's how we learn. Others? Come on. You have to have had something. Okay, Willie. Oh, you need to unmute, Willie.
Trying.
Okay.
Okay. What I've noticed about the purchase agreement, for the last probably 12 years or more, I've been on the grievance committee. And in terms of the purchase agreement, it's interesting to see that a couple of the cases that we have looked at in grievance, there is some now paragraphs in the purchase agreement that have relevance to those issues. And I find that extremely interesting that it obviously had a very serious impact to have made its way onto the purchase agreement.
Yeah, that's one of our, well, of course, the thing that's interesting about grievance and professional standards is over the years, we've made an attempt to have those results of those cases be made more public. To not much success because we're an association and the concept is you don't do that. You don't put that out there for everybody to see what happened to somebody else or in a case frequently because maybe they were found not in violation, right? But that is a source for so much information that can help us. Just a second, Beth, and I'll be right with you. And so that source is critical. And what can happen is those pro standards people can bring it to somebody like Bev or to the forms committee. And they can say, listen, I can't give you the specifics, but here's what happened. We think it'd be really great if you considered putting it in the purchase agreement. Bev. Unmute.
Hi. So,
Hi.
I could give you, I have one really good example of what Willie was talking about. And that is the new section of the purchase agreement that the seller has to initial, that we don't verify the veracity, a word I've never used before Ashley Strauss Martin came along, that the seller has to verify the pre-qual letter and the veracity and that it is real. And that one little paragraph, 3 lines or something like that, was born out of the need for one broker whose seller got mad because the broker did not verify that the lender's letter was legitimate and felt that that broker should have verified it. Well, because that happened to one broker who took that experience and that basically a fail that none of us had ever had before, because he took that to the forms committee, to Ashley Strauss Martin, that became something that protects all of us. All it has to happen is to one broker to make the forms committee change something so that it doesn't happen to anybody else. So Ida, your comment about, and I know you're going to go into it later, about contact the forms committee, send them an email, call Ashley, send her an email. That stuff, although I'm not on the forms committee this year, having been on the forms committee in the past, they look at member emails and they consider, wow, is that something we ought to add, change? Did that person get in trouble because we didn't cover it in the purchase agreement? And you really have a say. It's just one person who has a bad experience that will create a better contract for all of you. Just let Ashley know, or let the forms committee know. That's it.
And Kim Elliott has a question.
Okay, Kim?
Yes, I too served on the grievance committee and a couple of other committees. But I wanted to give a shout out to Ashley Strauss Martin. I feel like we're very fortunate to have her, and she's an excellent resource whenever there is a question, and it does help to bring things up when she hears about it. I mean, I can't even tell you enough on that, but also GAR and Southwest MLS, our resources there are pretty excellent, in my opinion.
Agreed.
And
Oh, Tigo? Tigo, where are you? You keep moving on my screen. Oh, no, I see. You keep moving on my screen. Tigo.
I'm jumping around. Keep you on your toes. This is more of a question, and I'm not sure to who, Beverly or somebody else. But on the forms, it seems, is there a reason we update the year every year? Because some of the forms, the form doesn't change, but yet we just put a new date on it, which means we have to reload it into all these electronic signature systems. I'm just thinking efficiencies here.
Can I just answer that real quick?
Yes.
It's a copyright issue, Tigo, if I'm not mistaken, and they have to be copywritten every year.
Well, because I've seen it in other, like Arizona, for example, they don't do that. They just say this form was revised on blah, 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 but it just stays that way until something changes.
I think one of the other things might be, and I've heard this from others, that our E&O insurance calls for us to use the most current form. And I'm wondering if we didn't have something driven from them that says it needs to have the current year date on it, right? I mean, that's maybe a possibility.
Right. Okay.
Talk a little bit.
Bennett had his hand up.
Oh, Bennett, go ahead. He has his hand up. I see you.
Am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. One of the biggest things in changes of practice and in our agreements is the whole idea of buyer agency, which came about 1992. And I was trained beginning in 1975. And what I did was, when I got a buyer, I had to let them know very early on that their Miranda rights, that what they say could be used against them. And that was a really difficult thing. And so the in 1992, buyer agency finally, I think, broke into our purchase agreement. And I don't think that the agreements were really cleaned up as to what buyer agency was until about 1996. but it was a really big thing, and I just wanted to mention that.
True, very true. Now, I want to back up talking about sharing your experience that Bev was talking about. So in this age of technology, and in this age of a proliferation of one person to very small offices or very large offices where many people home office, right? We don't have what we used to have. We used to have people together all the time. And many of us sat in what was called bullpens. So we would be in an office that had, the first office I was in had like 12 desks on one side and 10 desks on the other. And we were just like cheek to jowl, right here. So when somebody would pick up the phone and have a conversation or have a problem, we would all hear what it was and we all could learn. It was a really, really valuable time because we could then walk away from it and go, that happened to Leah Beth, and I need to remember now when I write my next purchase agreement that I pay attention to that particular thing. And now we're so separated that we do need the input and we do need people taking the time to share their experiences where you can. And and that's also, Bev, you're right, gave us good ways to dialogue as well. There was a lot that you could get from those days when we were all together. It was really, really valuable. All right, who else has a personal story? Oh, come on. Somebody else has to have a personal story. Okay, let me just
I've got a story. This is
Okay.
Linda. Hi.
Where are you? I guess I can't see
May not
you.
know here, yeah.
Well, we have 97 people in this class. No
Here I
wonder
am.
they let us come to the board. Okay, hi Linda.
Hi.
Long time no see.
So, so I was at the Vaughn Company during this time, and we used to have those Chemtrons for the MLS.
Uh-huh.
There no pictures, just raw, MS-DOS data.
And if
And
you left it in the sun too long, you couldn't read it.
yeah, exactly. And the one day I was on floor duty. Nobody else was in the office. It was a very quiet day. And I think our purchase agreements then were maybe 2 or 3 pages, but they weren't that complicated. But I always made a habit of having a stack of them on the desk, blank ones. And so I got a floor call, and this lady said, I have to buy a condo. I'm in a time crunch. I got to find something. I tried to log into the system, and it was a system-wide crash. And not only did the computers break, but the printers broke. And so I couldn't have done anything anywhere. And we didn't have printers connected to our personal, nobody had a personal PC except me. So I ran up and down the hall and happened to notice that one of the associate brokers had a flyer on the bulletin board with a condo that had just been listed in Rio Rancho. And so instead of telling her everything was broken, I said, I've got the perfect place for you. Let's go meet. And I picked up all my paperwork and ran to the condo. And it's the first thing she saw. It's the only thing she saw. And she ended up buying it. And I happened to have all the paperwork. That would have been about 1996. So I felt kind of heroic that I happened to be prepared in case the lights went out.
You are the example of what realtors are, which we are flexible. We are on our feet and we can switch if we have to switch. We can do what we have to do.
Yeah, I just thought I was really lucky that somebody had put up what was beginning to be considered kind of an old-fashioned thing, like a flyer. I was just glad, and I took the flyer off the wall, so I knew where I was going.
I have no idea what time it is. Does anybody?
It is 10:10.
10:10. Okay. I'm going to do a couple of things as wrap up, unless we have somebody else with a story
Or a question.
or a question. No. Okay. So first thing, I want to say that when I was asked to do this, I thought, sure, it's just from here to here, and so it's like getting ready to move. and you think you've got it all put together and you look around at the furniture and then you start opening the closets and you start opening the drawers and you start opening everything and you're stunned with how much pops out, right? And suddenly you need to go get about 50 more boxes than what you have. So that's kind of what this is. I said to Channing that I think she should do a class on this because I think this could easily be handled correctly and looked at in depth. This could be a 4-hour class easily. And I think it would be a very valuable class for people to be able to learn about how things came about and why we are where we are and why we're having to do this. So that's my story. If we could go to that next. Oh, educational, good. Thank you, Helen.
I think that's all we have.
We were gonna do the one about the showing about forms.
I don't have that.
All right. I want you to, and I don't have it, I thought we had it on the thing. If you have a desire to serve on the forms committee, Bev, who do they call? Or who do they email? Yeah.
They would send, in my opinion, I think they send the email to Barbara at nmrealtor.com. I'll put it in the chat. The applications, the email, if you've opted out of receiving emails from NMAR, you will never know about it. But they do send out applications for all committees around about July, August, I think, somewhere in there, because the incoming president will be selecting the new chair for the forms committee and all the members who are going to serve on it. So you do have to apply. By the way, it is the one committee that gets more applications than any other committee at NMAR.
I believe it. Now, what about if somebody wants to send in a request for something to be looked at? Is that you or who? I don't want to inundate you. So
Okay. I got to tell it.
It's
You
the
just
same one.
Linda at Real Estate in Albuquerque, right?
That's right.
Okay.
I couldn't resist, Linda. Sorry.
Sorry, Linda, but you're it.
Same person.
No, actually, I don't mind at all. And it's funny because I tell people in our brokerage and people I know outside the brokerage, if you have opinions, if you need something changed, please email me. I honestly get maybe 2 emails every 2 or 3 months. Nobody,
So-
they talk about it, but they'll not commit to the email, but I don't mind at all.
So that's a challenge for the 99 plus that are attending this. So let's see if we can't give Linda a few more emails to. Look
Yay.
at.
And just so the members know, we do redact the sender. And so once it gets to committee for review, it's not public knowledge who has sent the email in.
Okay, good. Now, Barbara's the person for both inquiries and issues. Okay, or Linda. All right. This has been fun. It's been informative. I love hearing. I wish I could have, I thought I should go get some mannequins and put them here and put faces on it because it feels so strange to talk to you this way versus being able to have you and see you in the room and walk over and tap you on the shoulder and that kind of thing. So, but I got through it. And one more thing in my being brought into the world of technology to do a Zoom class. So thank you for attending, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Ida.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Have a good one.
You too. Thank you.
Jessica Tafoya, are you still here? Are you still logged on? Oh, I guess not.
No,
All
I
right.
am here.
Oh, Jessica, where are you?
Oh, she's a flower. You can't see her.
Okay, I can't see you. So Jessica, do I know you? Are you the Jessica Tafoya that I know from years past?
I don't believe so. I just started in
Oh,
2017.
I just wanted to check and ask. All right. Have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Great job. Thanks for all the participation, Ian and Pam, all your experience, Amber. Great information. Thanks
Thanks,
so much.
guys.
Yours too.
then